It was certainly, I think we all know about these junk fees, and we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Caroline Cohn, who's an attorney and Equal Justice Works Fellow at the National Consumer Law Center. Caroline, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me and for bringing attention to this issue.
Well, it's a crucial issue. It's certainly one that I was happy to hear the president talk about. I think we've all felt it in our pocketbook. But, you know, one element of the junk fees that is not really being addressed as of yet, it seems in a major way, correct me if I'm wrong, in front of the legislature, is those junk fees connected to mass incarceration and the incarcerated people in this country. So maybe just to start, I mean, give us a sense of what those who are incarcerated are sort of put upon them and their families as it concerns these fees.
Yeah, absolutely. You are correct that this has not made it into Biden's speeches or into the spotlight much at all. My organization and 28 other organizations submitted comments to the Federal Trade Commission about junk fees affecting justice-involved people. And the things we're talking about here are, you know, being gouged to send money to your family member, being gouged with fees when you are just trying to access your own money when you're released from prison, which might be money that you had when you were arrested or money that you accrued while you were inside. And then just to be able to get access to your own money again, you get a debit card instead of a cash or check, and that debit card charges you fees for using the card or not using the card or making a purchase and having it declined. All these ways to gouge consumers in this space. Emails are another one. They're free on the outside. They're about 50 cents per email for no reason on the inside. Tablets are another source of fee harvesting for these private companies. So those are the sorts of fees that incarcerated folks and their families are up against.
You know, I have an extended family member who is in prison, and his family goes crazy because it's crazy when you think about like the fact that you're given in prison the cheapest of cheapest products to wash your body with, to brush your teeth with. And if you want something that isn't going to give you a rash or isn't going to make you sick, you have to have a family that's going to be able to put money into purchasing all of these kinds of things. I mean, and the price gouging is insane. And the amount of money that his family just ends up spending for him to have access to like super basic things that you and I can go easily purchase at like Walmart or CVS or wherever is just unbelievable. But I just wasn't aware of this debit card issue that like when you get out, can you talk a little bit about what exactly that is? I had no idea this even existed. What exactly that is and how it can lead to you being charged with the little amount that you have left, if you're lucky enough, I guess, to even have any money left when you get out.
Yes, and I'd actually like to touch on the first string of things you mentioned, just how expensive it is to be in prison or jail, which I think a lot of people who are lucky enough to not have a loved one who's incarcerated think that it's free once you're in prison or jail. And that was true a while ago, maybe, but not anymore. Private companies have absolutely pervaded prisons and jails, and it is extremely expensive. You have to buy stamps, your own paper, tampons and pads, over-the-counter meds, medical copays. So I just want to reiterate what you said and say that's absolutely right. And I think that's a common misconception. And, that was one fee that we raised too, is family members have to send money in so that their loved ones can pay for these things. And the fees for sending money in will be, the average fee is 20%. Compare that to Venmo or Zelle, it's free, or maybe, around 3% if if there's a credit or debit card involved, but there's no reason it needs to be 20%. That's not the actual cost of these transfers. But then to go to your other question about release cards, I also did not know that was a thing before working on policy in this space. And it used to be the case that prisons and jails would give people their money on a check or via cash. And then private equity got involved and said, why don't we use these release cards, these prepaid debit cards, which could be more convenient for folks, but not in the way that they're currently used. They're extremely laden with fees and I mentioned closing an account. I think one company charges $10 just to close your account. So do you even have $10 left on your card at that point? And this is to access your own money, or making a purchase. If you go to CVS and buy something with your credit card, you don't have to pay the fee for that transaction because CVS pays your bank. And that's true for these prepaid debit cards too. The debit card company is paying the bank, is being paid by the merchant, but they're charging the recently released person too. So they're just double collecting there. So it's really just a way of price gouging because they can and because people don't have another choice.
One of the things about this that just strikes me as so incredibly predatory is, the importance of many of these services, especially staying connected to people on the outside, staying connected to life on the outside. I mean, the way tablets, for instance, are promoted, and correctly so, is, recidivism is always reduced when you have more connection to people and more connection to the world. So, the way they'll say, oh, we're providing tablets to people for music, for video services. But it seems that some of these companies, especially, are providing services for significantly higher prices than what the same service would cost on the outside. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So these tablets are often touted as free, and sometimes the tablet themselves is free, but then the costs of the things that you can do on the tablet are extremely expensive. So, a Spotify account might be $10 a month for your family. It's $15 for 2 weeks if you're incarcerated. Emails are also sent via tablets, and those are 50 cents. They're free on the outside, and staying in touch with loved ones is extremely important, also for recidivism and successful reentry. And the company JPay is one of the big tablet providers, and they say, this is cheaper than a postage stamp. But there's no reason to compare the cost to a postage stamp. Postage stamps have to be, it's the law that they have to be set at a rate that compensates the postal service for how much it costs to actually process mail. But it does not cost 50 cents to process an email. And they also have character limits on these emails often. Different companies will. So you'll have to send multiple emails. But again, we have the technology. The technology's there, and they're just finding ways to make it more expensive. Oh, and a couple more egregious.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, please. I want to hear the couple more. Yeah.
Thank you. On the tablets is in Pennsylvania, they ended book donations in favor of expensive ebooks, and they took a lot of those ebooks from a free online library. Another example, a Florida jail, took away Bibles, and folks have to get e-Bibles on tablets. So it is. You can't make it up. It's really outrageous, and it's almost laughable, but it's so tragic that it's a really bad situation.
Well, I was going to ask you, who are the companies that are profiting off of this? Are they companies specifically set up just to sell these particular products at these insanely high prices in jails, in prisons, or are there banks profiting? I mean, usually there's like already really big companies that are getting in on the profit here. So I'm just curious, who is profiting off of this?
That's an excellent question. It's really come down to it's an oligopoly. There's very few players who are in this space now. Securus, if you have a loved one in prison, you've probably heard of Securus because they're a major telecom provider. And the other one is used to be called Global Tel-Link or GTL. Now it's ViaPath. Those were the two major phone companies. They cover about 60% of people who are incarcerated, their phone calls. And phone calls have become increasingly regulated, which is great, and they need to be more regulated or become free. That's what we're pushing. But as this space has become more regulated, those telecoms companies have evolved to evade regulation by buying up tons of competitors, and basically, now JPay and Securus are part of the same parent, owned by the same parent company, and they cover phone calls and tablets and emails and debit release cards. And it's really this oligopoly, like I said. So it's companies that specialize in the correctional macro economy. And to your question about whether banks are getting in on this, that's a great question. My guess is yes, but I don't actually know the answer to that.
Well, it'll be interesting, something maybe for us to do a little research on the journalism side, because for sure,
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like such a hamster wheel. You know, I remember when the prison phone calls issue was so huge, and then they told everyone it was solved, and here we still are. But talk about the campaign that you all are waging at the National Consumer Law Center with a very big coalition, because at least seems like the junk fee issue overall is getting some traction. So perhaps it's a propitious moment here for this issue as well.
Yes, that's what we're hoping for. And the Biden administration has, made a lot of their racial equity goals, and they say that they're very focused on justice-involved individuals across different agencies. So there was this proposed rulemaking, and I can back up because I didn't know what any of this meant before I was in this space or went to law school. Basically, executive agencies, before they can make a rule in their space, so executive agencies are like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, the Federal Trade Commission is the one we submitted comments to in this case. Before they make a rule to regulate an industry, for example, they have to put out a proposed rule and accept comments from the public on that rule and have to consider those. So that's what happened with the Federal Trade Commission. We submitted these comments about they did a proposed rulemaking on addressing junk fees, and we said, hey, we love that you want to address junk fees, but you really can't overlook incarcerated people and their loved ones when you're doing this. They're an extremely vulnerable population who are extremely harmed by these fees. So we're urging the Federal Trade Commission to look into this, the CFPB as well, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Different actions they can take are taking enforcement actions. If there's a particularly egregious actor, the CFPB actually already took some action against JPay for their conduct in the debit release space. And, that's what we're doing at the federal level. In addition to other advocacy, we're also doing things at the state level as well, supporting efforts to make prison phone calls free, because as you rightly point out, that issue is not over. So Massachusetts has some bills that were recently introduced to make prison and jail phone calls free there. So we're trying to capitalize on the momentum and push wherever we can gain some ground.
Who aren't involved in any particular advocacy role but are outraged by this, or people who maybe have family members who are incarcerated, who are just have had it up to here with all this stuff, what are ways that they can get involved in pushing for policy changes?
That's a great question. A couple of the organizations that we partnered with on these comments, one is Worth Rises. They have a great website showing all the different campaigns in different states and localities where free phone calls are being pushed. And I know that, it's an emotional toll, obviously, but to the extent people can testify about how these things affect them and their families, that's always extremely powerful. Our organization and the other organizations who signed on to the comment are often also funded by donations. So if people can spare money, the lobbyists on the other side are very well funded, but it's kind of these nonprofits who are fighting on this side. And just like you guys are doing, continuing to keep the spotlight on this issue, and like your viewers are doing, staying informed, because I think a lot of this goes very much under the radar, and that's on purpose.
Caroline Cohn, Equal Justice Works Fellow at the National Consumer Law Center. We really appreciate you taking some of your time to help us explain all this here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me.